The vast majority of people interrogated were interrogated for reasons of having been in the proximity of an event. And since then, I've had the occasion to interview and speak to a number of people who had been in military service in Iraq and who had the task of rounding up people, as they say, to take to Abu Ghraib, and all of them have acknowledged that their assignments were entirely based on quotas, that they were location-based, and very rarely based on the idea that one was pursuing a person who could be said to bear knowledge that could then be accessed through techniques that might have been deployed in the institutions of Abu Ghraib. So, between 70 and 95% of the people in Abu Ghraib there are not even there according to the institutions that operate them as possible sources of intelligence. The other set of statistics that we can perhaps remind ourselves of, also to be derived from the Department of Defense's own archive, its own reports. This doesn't make them truer. It just means that we can read against the grain and use against itself those documents, the only documents we have of those institutions and those events. The other statistics that we might bear in mind have to do with the argument that this was a minor, an aberrant set of events, unusual. I mean, perhaps after Pardee's just horrific account here, I don't even need to say this. But it's important to know that the DoD itself inscribes as its own record a recognition of the numbers of people involved in this, in what we came to understand of as torture. Torture now understood as a kind of violence that is separate from the process of generating knowledge. In fact, there were probably up to 140 personnel, 145 personnel involved in the interrogation at Abu Ghraib. And we're often told, but there were 175,000 military people stationed in Iraq. That is a tiny group. But very few people actually had any exposure to the detainees in Abu Ghraib relative to the total number of American personnel who were stationed in Iraq. In fact, two-thirds, literally two-thirds of those people who had exposure to the detainees in Abu Ghraib participated in the violence against those persons. That is no longer a question of an aberrant night shift, a group of unmoored and exceptional individuals. And it begs the question, as it begged the question for Faye and Jones and Tabuba, what is it that makes that possible? What is it that encourages it? Faye and Jones described it as a function of environmental factors, not least of which, again, of all the things we get images of, we don't get images of this, not least of the factors that constituted the environment in which people commit such heinous acts, is that it was in an area regularly subject to mortar attacks and other military engagements, and that it was not uncommon for bombs to land simply in the courtyard of Abu Ghraib and cause death and injury among military personnel, but also among those sons and grandfathers and other people rounded up along with someone who might have been in a house, that might have been in a place where something might have been known. Those kinds of events, in fact, were frequent and constituted one of the kind of crucial conditioning factors of not just the possible psychic dislocation of the military personnel, but of course of those who were in that space. If we recognize that this is neither aberrant, or at least not radically exceptional, that the function of what happened in Abu Ghraib was not intelligence gathering, we are left with a set of questions about what those images do represent, what was going on, why were photographs taken. It actually precedes Abu Ghraib, the military regulation that prohibits the taking a photograph of any detainee for purposes other than identity recording. Long before Abu Ghraib, it was illegal to take photographs of any detainee for anything other than identification. It was also illegal to subject anyone to, and this is a phrase that recurs repeatedly in military regulations, public curiosity. So there was a kind of built into the regulations, which, as we know, were neither applied nor perhaps even thought of as good things, I'm not sure. A kind of deep sense that the dignity of persons who were detained entailed their immunization to photographs, their exemption from being circulated in the form of an image, a kind of sort of projection of privacy laws into the space of the detainee. One of the reasons why, or one of the possible slippages that permitted the violation of that law, was the conception in DOD and other state policy, the conception that those who were in Abu Ghraib were actually criminals and not prisoners of war. And in fact, one could say that a great deal of what did occur in Abu Ghraib rested on this ideological conflation of the category of prisoner of war with the category of criminal. Why does it matter? Well, it matters for a number of reasons, not least that the U.S. government understands criminality officially to be a condition of freedom that entails one's consent to be arrested. And I'm going to quote for you from the Schlesinger report, which was the final report generated on the basis of the Fay and Jones report and then the Taguba report that followed it. Of course, my vocals actually work. In the ethical foundations of detention and interrogation as outlined by the Schlesinger panel, the following statement occurs. Criminals, by not respecting the rights of others, may be said to have consented, in principle, to arrest and possible imprisonment. In this construct, and due to the threat they represent, insurgents and terrorists consent to the possibility of being captured, detained, interrogated, and possibly killed.